Since the beginning of time, people have debated one thing over and over again. Should you pour your latte art with a handled pitcher or with a handle-less pitcher? Long answer short, it's actually pretty easy to do either one if you know what you're doing, but there are preferences and advantages, and so today we're gonna go over them individually, one by one, until you're educated. Welcome to my education channel on latte art. Super important. Courts have fought over this. It's a pretty contentious debate. People on both sides have very strong opinions over which one's right for them, and a lot of the time that personal preference leans onto whichever pitcher you got your hands on first. If you operated with handleless pitchers through your early career, then you probably are very adept to using handleless pitchers. If you operated with handle pitchers, you're probably really good at using handle pitchers, and that's just muscle memory. It is what it is. Today, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors from Flair. Flair is actually really close. I'm good friends with them, and I love everything they've made. They've made a lot of great inventions over the year, including the Wizard, which I have right next to me, piping hot, but now the new Flair steaming pitcher, and it's actually pretty cool. It is a modular pitcher, meaning you can take off the handle and you can go handleless anytime you want to. All you have to do is unscrew it, and then you are back to a handleless pitcher. Or if you want to do the inverse, you just screw that screw back in and you're back to a handled pitcher. Pretty much answering the question of which one should you get? Well, if you bought this, you got both. So that's the end. Basically makes my entire video pointless, so thank you again for the sponsors of this video, Flair. The first thing that makes these two different is obviously how you will hold the pitcher when you're pouring. When you're working with a handled pitcher, you of course are going to hold it by the handle. You want to find the point of the pitcher where it's going to balance, like so. That way, when you're holding it, you have more control over that tilt. You can kind of think of this like a chef's knife. When you are holding a chef's knife, you don't want to hold it at the end to chop your veggies, and you don't want to hold it all the way in the front. You want to find the center of balance, which is usually around where the knife connects with the handle, and that's where you should put your hand so that you have more control over what you're chopping and, of course, over the knife. Be careful with knives, kids. That tilt is going to basically be whether or not you're dipping too far in one direction or you're having to compensate by tilting it even more just to get it to turn. If you're in the back, it's going to be harder for you to control versus being up here in the front or even on the side in the middle like that. If you're using a handle-less pitcher, you're just holding it. Right? You can hold it in the back or you could hold it in the front for a little bit more control, up to you, but those are kind of your only two options for handleless. But with a handle, you basically have infinite options depending on how you want to hold it. You can grip it from the side like this. You can do what I do where you use your middle finger. You can hold it here in the front like a pencil. And with those infinite grips comes, again, preference. And I'll tell you guys what my preference is right now. It's kind of a little punk rock, the middle finger grip. But please, I'm not flicking you off. I swear, this is just how I like to push the ripples in my pitcher. But I like to create the ripples in my pitcher using my finger like so. And so where the ripples are coming from is different. And that leads us to our next one. They ripple different. Now again, it's super nuanced, but I believe that you get a more dexterous and a more precise control of your ripples when you're using the handle because you can be more nuanced. It takes a lot more effort to get a ripple from here on the handle into the pitcher versus if you're holding it handleless, every single movement you make is affecting the ripples you're pouring. So what I've found is that when you're using a handle-less pitcher, it is a lot easier to do wider waves more naturally, and you can do fine line. You can be super dexterous. Again, anyone with skill can use either pitcher effectively. But with this extra handle, you have a little bit more of that nuance. You can go a little lighter, you can even go heavier, but I just find there's a little more granularity because it's limiting what you're able to put into the ripple. And if you're doing something more flowy with lots of waves, it is naturally more intuitive to just use your wrist and your elbow when you're doing that. I also appreciate how you push on the handle when you make a ripple. Typically, whenever you are using the handle, like we just said, you will have some kind of resistance on one side and a push on the other. And if it's coming from the wrist, great. If it's coming from your finger, all the better, whatever you want to do. But you're pushing it and you're resisting it on one side. And so with that, your motions can be a little bit more delicate versus here where you have to physically move side to side to get it to move. When I think of handled pitchers, I think of them more like a car and how you would control the steering wheel and the gas and the brakes versus a handleless, which feels more like you're on a skateboard and it's more intuitive, feels more flowy. Another thing that can compromise you when you're holding with the handle is if you're not gripping enough. Say you're holding it lightly like this and you're trying to do Ripples, well, your ripples are never going to appear. What's going to happen is the pitcher is going to move, but the wave inside the pitcher is not going to do anything. That's why we create resistance with our thumb, our finger, whether it's in this shape, this shape, this shape. Essentially, you're pushing on one side and you're resisting on the other. If you were to try to grip lightly with a handleless pitcher, you would just drop the handleless pitcher because you cannot do that. Where those ripples are coming from with the handleless is typically in the elbow and the wrist, whereas with a handle, you're going to see it in the wrist, in the fingers, and maybe sometimes in the elbow, but very unlikely. Which leads me to my next point, where you hold the pitcher. This is not universally a rule, but a lot of people that use handleless pitchers tend to hold their cups up closer to their face like so, because you have a straighter elbow, and if it's coming from your wrist and it's coming from your elbow, your arm as a whole, it's a little easier for you to do this when you can go side to side like this. Whereas someone like myself, I tend to pour with my handle pitcher actually looking at a bird's eye view, pouring straight down. So I will try to get over the pitcher and pour from a bird's eye view. I pour all the way down to my waist sometimes, which is way lower than most people when they're pouring. So if I'm thinking of the cup as having a grid on it, I can see where the handle is going to align with that. With a handleless pitcher, you can't really do that. You could try to pour from top down all the way down at your wrist with a handleless pitcher, but I just think that would be kind of weird and clunky to have your arm down there, feel so far away. It just makes sense more naturally to have a bit more control up here and control it like that. Which leads me to my next point, tilting issues. Whenever you're picking up a pitcher and it has a handle, there's always the chance that the handle and the spout are going to be misaligned, or one will be crooked facing a different direction. This is pretty common and it can mess up your latte art. With handleless pitchers, you just don't have that issue because you are in control of what angle you start at. You can just pour and correct it with a little tilt, like so. But with that comes an inverse caveat, as like we were saying before, if you're aiming down with a handle and it is accurate, whenever you pick it up, you are most likely going to land symmetrically, most likely unless you're tilting. But because the handle's kind of resting against gravity in your hand, and if it's even, it's likely going to stay perfectly centered where you want it when you're tilting down to pour. If you were to grab a handleless pitcher, there's always the chance that you grabbed it at a little bit of an off angle, and when you go to pour, you will see the asymmetry. What happens to me a lot is that I see more asymmetry in a handleless pitcher once I start my pour, but then it corrects itself because all I have to do is tilt over a little bit. Whereas a handled pitcher, I tend to see less asymmetry in the beginning, but over time I might lean one direction or another. And it's a little trickier to overcorrect for those should your pitcher be off a little bit or should you have started a little bit off with the handle. It's not as intuitive as you started a little crooked, oh, I'll just tilt over a little bit. When you have a handle, it kind of feels weird to do that. Another little bonus point that does not happen on this pitcher but can happen on handleless pitchers is that sometimes when they have a strap on the front like so, and they have little buckles or things like that, or it doesn't dip deep enough like it does on this pitcher right here. You see that little V-neck it's making? That can get caught on your cup when you're pouring. But it's important that you have a strap, which you don't see on handled pitchers, because you're touching hot milk. So as you're steaming the milk, you don't want to get burned, obviously, which you normally would be holding the handle to steam. So in this case, you need a sleeve. But sometimes manufacturers make the sleeves kind of funky, or they have little buttons, or whatever the case is, and they'll just get caught on your coffee. And almost all the time, handle pitchers don't have that issue because they tend to be mostly metal. Now this one is not, it does have a sleeve, but that actually leads me to my next point. Typically with handled pitchers, you're able to feel the milk as you're steaming it. It's a little bit easier without a grip around your pitcher. So when you're steaming your milk, you can make sure you're getting the right temp. However, even though this pitcher is both handled and sleeved, you do have a second option. And that, of course, is the flare thermometer that fits in right here at the top, and it is touch screen. Pretty nice for a thermometer. So you never have to worry about if you're getting the correct temperature in your pitcher. And the last little point I want to make, that there is less variety for handleless pitchers on the market. Almost every pitcher you see online is going to be a handled pitcher. They come in bigger sizes, they come in smaller sizes, everything in between. They come in multiple colors, whereas almost every handleless pitcher comes in maybe a couple colors, mostly black, mostly stainless steel. Still really nice, but it is more limited in its quantity. They're just less often used. It's true that the handles have become the industry standard, but it is also cool to see manufacturers start to make hybrids like this, where if you didn't want to work with the handle one day, you could take it off. And I see a world where in the future you can replace the handle with different style handles. Maybe they have different grips, maybe they fit your fingers better. I think that's a really high potential for a product like this. Thank you again to our sponsors, Flair, for making this video possible. And if you guys want to check out this, you can go check out the link in my description right now. I'm all for modularity. I'm all for the future of pitchers. We need more of them on the market, so go check that out as soon as you can. But what team are you? Are you team handleless or are you team handle pitcher? And if you're team handleless, would you ever consider converting to the cool side of handle pitchers? Let me know down in the comments what you guys think. It is nuanced, it is personal. You're just gonna get used to one and you might get a little stuck in your ways like me. You wanna be like me, right?